Name 3 countries that are not in North America.
Unfortunately, this isn't the only case like this. Current education system is broken, which is not only seen with lack of knowledge in students all around the world, but also with their lack of basic problem-solving skills in everyday scenarios. Today we will discuss why the education is like this and what can we do to make a change. To truly understand why the education looks like this today, we have to go back to the place it all started with, to ancient Greece. As you may expect, education was totally different compared to how it is now. School wasn't really an institution back in those days. It was more of a way of life back then. It truly emphasized being able to ask and answer difficult questions. Being able to think critically was one of the biggest goals of this system, if you can really call it a system. Another big difference is that people were truly emphasizing being athletic back in those days. They truly weren't separating your mental and physical side. To the contrary, they thought that being athletic and intelligent was the biggest virtue one can strive for. I think that the best way to summarize how those times approached education is that through rigorous exercise and challenging your mind, they were striving to become the best versions of themselves. Yeah, so it's nice to hear that the education was great in ancient Greece, but what about our education? Why is it so broken? I think that the biggest problem with current education is that we are not focusing on problem-solving skills, but we just try to memorize all of this. And I'm not saying that you don't have to memorize anything, it's just that memorization isn't enough when you want to solve difficult problems. If you want to be a great problem solver, you have to be able to see connections, if you know what I mean. And what's even funnier is that school prioritizes memorization, but it doesn't teach you how to do it correctly. If you want a video on how to learn more efficiently, then just give me a sign in the comments. That creates a lot of problems because when you just remember and you don't understand something fundamentally, then you may struggle to use it in new context. And this is exactly why we struggle with math so much. Of course, one can say that mathematics is primarily based on critical thinking, but if we look deeper into how do we teach math today, we are not trying to enforce people to truly understand those concepts, but we just reward great memory. So that students are not going to prioritize understanding something, but just memorizing principles without truly understanding why they work in the first place. This system is made to condition you to become a great civilian and worker, which means that you don't have to be able to ask difficult questions and to understand those difficult concepts. You just have to know the basics and to remember how to use them to work efficiently. The system doesn't predict that you will have to solve difficult and complex problems. It conditions people to be great at not truly challenging mentally, but repetitive tasks. The same thing as with the physical education. You don't need the perfect body, you don't need to be athletic. You just need to be able to work, to move things around, and that's enough. It's a shame that the school today is just a tool to shape you into this perfect model worker and not truly to help you become fuller, more virtuous version of yourself. It doesn't teach you how to use your knowledge as a tool to become a great person. It doesn't help you with being healthy. Also, it's not particularly helpful when it comes to guiding you in a world of relationships. So why? Why the school is like this? Why it all happened? Something had to change in those 2000 years, so that we are not pursuing self-perfection anymore like in ancient Greece. After the ancient world crumbled to dust and medieval ages started to emerge, something changed. Medieval approach to education was totally different compared to ancient one, and of course when we talk about education in those days, we have to remember that it wasn't as common as today. It was reserved mostly for the elites and people who are able to afford such privilege. Nevertheless, we can see how the approach to education changed over those years. School wasn't really a tool to become the best version of yourself anymore, but more of a tool to spread the word of God. The reason why it happened is mostly the rise of Christianity over those years, and the fact that education was mostly reserved for cleric class back in those days. The vast majority of people in medieval times weren't really able to read, and they relied heavily on cleric class to explain to them things like Bible, and also on all the other stuff that required being literate to do. It's just way cheaper and easier to deal with a society which isn't literate. Which shows because when people tried to oppose important institutions like church or kingdom, it was very easy to deal with them by calling them devils or offenders of God. When you read about those times, you can see that people really didn't like science back in those days. And two great examples of this are witch hunts and the scandal around heliocentric theory. It wasn't seen well if you had a different opinion on something compared to Catholic Church. It was just easier to keep people far from important knowledge, and even if they got their hands on it and started making their own assumptions, just to kill them. A few hundred years later, when industrialization became a thing, education became more common among simple men. We just needed more people to have basic education in order for them to work in factories and become soldiers. Being able to read, write, count, and understand simple instructions were necessary in order to work there. Discipline and respect were also very important. You just needed some way to keep those people at bay even though they knew how to read and write now. And this is exactly why this system doesn't prioritize critical thinking nor any other important skills, because it was just too dangerous to teach people how to think for themselves, because if they really were able to do that, they could very easily start to oppose you, and this could cause some very difficult problems for the people who ruled back in those days. And if you ever wondered, if you ever asked yourself this important question, why don't we teach this important stuff now? You have an answer. People simply don't want you to understand those concepts. People don't want you to know about how money works. People don't want you to have power, because knowledge is power. And if we teach people something which they can use against us, yeah, we may face some consequences. Education today is free just because it works great for the system. We don't have to teach people how to handle money, how to handle themselves, how to handle emotion. We just have to teach them how to do basic stuff and to punish them if they try to do anything else, and if they try to think for themselves, and even worse, if they try to think against us, then they are going to face severe consequences. Yeah, I'm just kidding. Not really kidding, I'm just saying all of this in a comical tone. But I believe you understand what I mean by this. As you may see, I'm not particularly happy with the state of current education, but to be honest, is it really that bad? Of course, we could do our best when it came to teaching people all of those important things, but it's just very hard to establish those changes. Firstly, because there is not enough people who are willing to vote for this. And secondly is that people in power don't really want to establish those changes, because for them, like I explained before, this situation is truly beneficial. But does this mean that we shouldn't be trying to acquire those skills by ourselves? I think there are a lot of people who are willing to use this argument of being born in a country with poor education as some sort of excuse to not even try to learn anything for themselves. I personally think that, especially in current world, with really easy access to internet and the rise of very powerful AI tools, which we can observe for our past few years, it's really easier than ever to learn anything by yourself. There is this recent trend of talking about AI in some really pessimistic way. I even recorded a video about it past week. But is it really that bad for your mind? I personally think that it all depends on how you use it. If you're just using AI to help you write your essays and to pretty much let you don't think, then of course you are going to regress while using this tool. But if you use it as some sort of teacher, someone who is going to challenge you on a daily basis, someone who is going to tell you what should you learn and where are the areas you should improve, then there is some really good space for improvement. The simple fact that you can access, whenever you want, a tool which is intelligent, has pretty much an infinite knowledge compared to a human, and is pretty much programmed to be as patient as possible when dealing with this kind of situation, it's really concerning when we think about how an average teacher approaches teaching nowadays. Of course, I think that we can all agree that AI cannot fully replace human interactions, but when it comes to teaching, those interactions are mostly just poor and sometimes even toxic. So, is it really true? Will this new technology that is really hated on when it comes to how it makes people stupid, will it help us to reshape this system, which was the same for the last few hundred years? People are already using AI to cheat in school, so imagine if the same people just use this to learn instead. And I know that actually studying and not cheating isn't easy, but you can learn pretty much anything using this technology. Wanna learn a foreign language? Just ask it for rules, vocabulary, and practice by typing or talking with it. And it sounds great on paper. But reality, when people develop themselves using AI, isn't really attainable with current approach to education. We have tools to educate people, but we don't have correct approach to do that. Because unless we'll come back to the idea of perfecting yourself, which was very prominent in ancient Greece, people will just ignore this option. They will rather to use it as a form of entertainment, or just an easy way to avoid responsibility. I have to say that by recording this video, I've come to a conclusion that the real problem with the education system isn't really what we teach or who is teaching, but rather the ideas we try to enforce in people. Because if we are trying to tell them that they can be great, that they should strive for it, that they shouldn't be afraid of being innovative, and if we support them in this journey, then they can truly become the best version of themselves.